close. Even I.
I did it through.
I don't. But they have questions like this. He's not happy about that. I think having to wait. I said, yeah. Okay. No, I understand. That's not a good thing for you potentially, because it's like, don't come back. But there really isn't, some of the crap they're coming up with is like.
I think the point was for 2-1 move.
And I said, it's particularly something in the
You
same.
ready, Paul? Chelmsford Telemedia will do 5 seconds.
Therefore, guess what? Right. I'm not.
Okay, it is 6 o'clock, and I'm going to call this meeting of the joint meeting of the Select Board, Planning Board, and Board of Health together. And we have also invited the Chelmsford Water District, North Chelmsford Water District, and East Chelmsford Water Districts to participate. Would you please join me in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, for everyone's benefit and also for the record, we're going to go around and do introductions. If you could clearly state your name and your organization that you're here for. If you're seated around this table, whenever you speak, please make sure you're using a microphone. So you can come join us at the table. I'm going to start in the Zoom room. So no one has the same first name. So when I call out your first name, if you could please unmute and introduce yourself. Christine?
Hi, I'm Christine Clancy, DPW Director.
Bruce? We'll come back to Bruce. Bill?
I'm here, Bruce Harper with the North Chelmsford Water District.
Bill?
Bill Martin with the Chelmsford Water District.
Paul?
Paul Paris, North Chelmsford Water District.
Anita?
Anita Tanini, Planning Board.
And Tim?
Tim Shanahan, Planning Board.
Okay, did I miss anyone in the Zoom room? Okay, so we'll go around this room. I'm Virginia Timmons. I'm with the Select Board.
Richard Day, Chair of the Chelmsford Board of Health.
Bill Sanowski, Board of Health.
Sue Rosa, Health Director.
George Dixon, Board of Selectmen.
Mark Carrata, Select Board.
Mike Raisbeck, Chair, Planning Board.
Nancy Arroway, Planning
Old
Board.
fashioned.
Recording in progress.
Paul McDougall, Planning Board.
Pat Wojda, Select Board.
Andy Reid, Chelmsford Water District.
Mike Walsh, Planning Board. Ken LaFave, Select Board.
Evan Belansky, Community Development.
Tony Rapucci, Town Engineer.
Mike Voznaka, Sewer Superintendent.
Paul Cohen, Chelmsford Town Manager.
And John Potts with Weston and Sampson Engineers.
Thank you, everyone. As we go through the meeting, if you're in the Zoom room and you would like to speak, I'll be monitoring it, so please feel free to either turn on your video or use the raise hand function. You can find that at the bottom. If you click on reactions, there's a raise hand bar. And if that doesn't work, you can just unmute and shout out, "Hey, you." So the first thing we have on the agenda is public input. And we're going to be having public input throughout this meeting. So what I'm going to ask is for this public input, if you have comments related to the next topic, which is the proposed sewer capacity credit transfer policy, you're welcome to come forward. For public input, we need you to go to that table right there where the microphone is so they can pick you up at home.
Good evening.
And I'm sorry, for anyone who's doing public input, we need your name and address for the record.
Good evening. My name's Philip Iliopoulos, a resident of Chelmsford, address 161 Proctor Road. I guess I'm going to sit if that's okay, just because it's kind of...
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not very conducive to standing. Well, first off, I want to thank all the boards for gathering tonight to talk about what I think is a very critical issue for the town. I'm really here on my own behalf. You know, I was representing Bobby Moulton when he came before the planning board, but I sort of feel like, as I told the planning board that night, that I forced myself upon him because I had heard wind of his project. I had met with him to kind of just see what he was planning there, and I thought it would be critical to the center of town to, you know, see further revitalization. And if you look back the last 10 years or so, you've seen a lot that's happened with the center of town. All of us remember 10, 15 years of driving by and seeing the old Stop and Shop site vacant. We got that finally, redeveloped and revitalized. How long did we see the Oddfellows building vacant and run down? That's finally being revitalized. The Fisk House looks great. That's been revitalized. Even on Acton Road, the old bowling alley, I guess it was called, at 9 Acton Road, that really became a vacant property. Thankfully, that's going to be redeveloped. And so we've got a plan to look at the other side of the center of town, and we have someone who's willing to revitalize that property. But that can't be done with the current sewer moratorium. I'm going to go under the premise that all of us, or most of us, were in favor of the 2010 and 2020 master plan. And both of those master plans made the revitalization of Chelmsford Center one of the top goals and priorities. If you look at the recommendations in the 10 and 20 master plan, it specifically provides as goals of the town the revitalization, redevelopment in Chelmsford Center. And so I think if I were sitting in your shoes, which I'm not, but if I were, I would be looking at ways in which I could make those goals a reality. And I would look to see what we could do. I would basically look at it not from the perspective of maybe what this sole thing you're discussing tonight, but I would look at it more from the perspective of I want to continue with those goals and redevelop and revitalize the center of town. How do I make that happen? Maybe I free up 0.5% of capacity. My understanding is we're reserving about 3% right now, plus or minus. We've stopped right around 97. I'd probably, if I were a decision maker, I'd release 0.5% of that capacity, and I would earmark it specific to goals that the town's already established for revitalizing 129 and the center of town. Those goals pre-exist the sewer moratorium. They've been a focal point of the town's objective for even as far back as when I was on the board in the late 90s. We looked at 129 in the center of town. So you've got a pre-existing goal, a pre-existing objective, and I would release capacity in a limited way to further those goals. I think that's both defendable and very feasible. You're not at 100%, you're about 97%. Maybe I'd look at other ways we could gain some capacity. If people have illegal sun pumps or, old, water meters that maybe aren't giving the right data, whatever it might be, there's probably ways to reduce or give some capacity back to the town. So I guess what I'm going to ask the Board of Selectmen to do, and I think the Planning Board would support it from the perspective of positive redevelopment and revitalization, is to be bold. And don't worry about, well, what if someone challenges it, or, You know, that's what town council's for. We get challenges all the time, whether it's a planning board decision, a board of selectmen issue, we're in litigation all the time. That's nothing to worry about. Make a bold move, get moving on the goals we've already established for the town, and prioritize that capacity specific to the goals that you've already all adopted. The master plan's been approved and adopted by the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. It's already been adopted. It's probably even been supported by town meeting. So you've got the goals in place. Let's make the goals reality. Be bold tonight and in the future, and let's get these last few projects done, and then we can look at a long-term solution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jim Hanley. I'm president of Civil Design Consultants located at 344 North Main Street in Andover, Mass. And I'm here tonight representing Alan Coleman, who owns 250 Apollo Drive. I submitted a letter earlier today, and we're kind of in the middle of this from a development perspective. I thought it might be helpful, since all the stakeholders are here tonight, to kind of hear firsthand what the challenges are from us who's actually going through this process. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about what you have in front of you, which is the sewer credit, capacity credit discussion. So this has been a challenge for us. We probably did about 6 months of due diligence, give or take, on the project, on the site, on the location, what we could do at the site. We went in front of the planning board to get their initial approval for moving forward with a CEIOD special permit. Our project is a 50,500 square foot clean manufacturing addition to a 145,000 square foot office building at 250 Apollo Drive. We knew about the sewer moratorium. We know that we're within an aquifer protection district. We went through the process of digging test pits. Our initial understanding was that we would have to provide a system with secondary treatment that met with Title V. After formally submitting to the town, we received review letters from many of the department heads that are here. The overwhelming direction we got from most of the departments was, we don't really want to see a septic system within an aquifer protection district when there is the ability to tie into sewer. So we went back to the drawing board, took another look at the sewer moratorium, and that's where we are right now. We're kind of on hold in front of the planning board until we can figure out how we address storage. To give you a sense for the magnitude of the storage that we're talking about like 3 or 4 single-family houses worth of additional flow, and that's based on Title V, which for all the value Title V provides, the numbers are always inflated. We spoke with DPW. The direction that we got was that Title V would be what they looked at to figure out how much flow we were going to add to the system. The problem with that is that they are inflated. I provided some information earlier today that looked at what our building actually drew from the water system over the last decade. It's about 1,300 gallons per day. Title V estimates that we would have about 11,000 gallons per day. It's a good tool, but I think if you just use that, you're in a situation where you're stifling good development. You just bear with me for a moment. So we looked at our water meter readings for the existing building. If we applied those water meter readings, we're actually, to the new development, we're actually below the 500 gallons per day. So we're trying to come in with a proposal that somehow we can work with the town to get through. We're literally talking about maybe a few hundred gallons that's going to that's holding up a $15 million investment in the town. And that's kind of what we're working on now, and we're trying to get through. As far as the sewer capacity credit transfer policy goes, I read through it, we completely support it. The ability to work with DPW to attempt to try to remove some II to make up for what we think we're gonna contribute to our system is a great way to move forward. It's something that we've done in the past. The one thing that I suggest that the board here look at is some other options. Gray water systems are something that we can do. It's kind of source control, right? So if we're drawing water and not putting it back into the sewer. And then the other thing is low flow plumbing fixtures. Mr. Coleman made a pretty good investment in the building that had these ultra low flow plumbing fixtures. Federally mandated that a toilet in a commercial use can't flush at more than 1.6 gallons per minute. He actually has toilets that flush at 1 gallon per flush. And he has urinals in there that flush at a quarter of a gallon per flush. So we've made we've already made some significant strides to limit the amount of sewerage that we put into the system. And we hope that there's a recognition from the board, from the town, that's a benefit in that using the baseline water meter readings without recognizing that it's almost a penalty for us at that point. So just a couple of thoughts about where we've been, what we're doing, the challenges that we're having moving forward with the project until we can address this in support of the capacity credit policy.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak during public input at this time? Okay. Paul, do you want to introduce what you've put in the packet?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking time on a very busy period of the year around the holidays.
Is your mic on?
I'm sorry, what's
Is your
that?
mic on?
I hope it's on.
No, they just had to get closer.
You got to get closer.
Okay. Again, we've spent the last several meetings of the select board reviewing a sewer bank policy, and then we heard loud and clear from Richard and Andy, from the Water District, Richard from the Board of Health about the concerns regarding septic systems. So it came back the board at the suggestion of the chair with a sewer capacity credit transfer policy, and that's sort of what brings us here tonight. And the intent this evening is not to go through the policy line by line, word by word, but obviously to have a discussion with the stakeholders. And for those watching outside of the group, the intent here is to allow a non-residential property owner to increase the allocated flow into the sewer system, provided that there's sufficient amount of extraneous infiltration or inflow as determined by the DPW is permanently removed from the sewer system. And there's a deeded conveyance of allocated sewer flow from one or more non-residential properties to another property in the community enhancement and investment zoning and the village center overlay district. And so basically, again, it's addressing a targeted area of the town, which is what we refer to by the acronym of the COA district and the village center overlay district. And the way the I&I, the inflow and infiltration program would work would be they would receive a credit of 1 gallon per day of flow for every 2 gallons removed. If the new flow into the system were to exceed 15,000 gallons per day, the credit would be 1 gallon of credit for every 4 gallons of I&I removal in accordance with the Massachusetts Code of Municipal Regulations. Any applicant to this program would have to demonstrate to the DPW that the allocation of flow also would not have an adverse impact on the downstream portion of the town's sewer system due to inadequate sewer pipelines, pump station, or other capacity. And the reason for that, and we'll get into this, we talk about larger issues, is it's not just the flow at a location of the transfer, it's also the ability for that flow to basically flow from the site across the town into the city of Lowell to the Greater Lowell Regional Wastewater Facility. So again, you also have to be mindful of the infrastructure underground and what's constructed there and the capacity of those pipes. And how it would work in effect is there would have to be a deed restriction on the conveying and receiving properties to, recognize this transfer if the issue of a conveyance from one property to another. And the policies laid out under the current DPW sewer policy is they take your last 10 years of sewer flow, excluding vacancies or a COVID period and so forth. And then obviously key to any policy is that the DPW could monitor it. They may require sewer metering and can impose monetary penalties to ensure the compliance with the agreement. Again, this is the concept, and the whole idea of this meeting and bring it to the board and so forth is that if there is a consensus, then the DPW, which has the authority conveyed to it under the charter by way of the dissolution of the Board of Sewer Commissioners, they then would then enact such a policy going forward. So again, that's the intent. The intent is to again limit the credits to the economic development areas of the village center and the community investment districts, which is your 129, your Drum Hills, your Vinyl Square type of areas of the community. It's not to involve residential properties outside of those areas to generate credits. And again, I think the whole keeping in the spirit with this is we did impose a moratorium 2 years ago. That moratorium lapsed. We now have a revised sewer policy as of November 1st of this year. And thus far, the policy has not had any adverse impact on the residential property owners of the community. So somebody can come in, they can still put an in-law apartment in, they can put an addition to their home. So we don't have what you consider to be a hard cap. And the other thing that we've discovered, and we can get into this a little bit later, is we've discovered with this abnormally dry period of weather, we're almost a third less rainfall this year with 1 month to go than a normal calendar year rainfall. We've noticed a 10 or 15% decrease in the town sewer flow when we're well beyond more of a traditional economic period. And what that's leading us to believe and conclude is the fact that the groundwater table is rather dry. Our examinations that we had Weston and Sampson conduct with their engineering support services have determined that there really isn't much infiltration into our system as a result of leaking pipes and so forth. And that's not surprising given the relatively young age of the town sewer system. What we do think is taking place is we do believe that there may be inflow to the system as a result of some pumps from residential properties and perhaps roof drains. And obviously with an abnormally dry period, you're getting a reduction of that. So again, this policy is meant to be harmless in terms of the water supply and the water quality of the community by allowing the transfer capacity into the COA district for economic development purposes, and then also by allowing perhaps an inflow program. And our Public Works Director, Christine Clancy, is on the call, and she participated in one in her previous work when she was doing work in the town of Cambridge. That was presented to the board last month. Would be the idea of a pilot program where we could assist some residents with engineering and ultimately construction to again free up capacity because, and we'll get into this later, it's much less expensive to do that than to look at the design, engineering, construction, and operation costs of additional capacity, whether that's with the Lowell plant, which has limited capacity, or at another solution. So with that, I'll stop and open it up for further discussions. I have seen the comments that was submitted by the Department of Public Works and by John Potts, and I've tried to incorporate them into my comments this evening. So again, I don't want to get into the weeds of the policy, but I want to get into the general concept of allowing conveyance in order to meet the limited needs that appear to exist at the current time.
Any comments, questions? Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Said, what are you gonna say? Some for clarification on what I've been reading, kind of thing. Are we looking at a policy that basically is not exclusively, but predominantly looking at unnecessary water flows reaching the sewer system that weren't supposed to be there? Is that what the basis of where this capacity issue is going to come from? I mean, the issue of someone giving their capacity on that piece of property or that building to somebody else and diminishing the value of what they might have and whatever is kind of a long shot kind of thing that I don't see happening much, potentially happening much. But is this concept, when they talked about the word amnesty and all those other kinds of things or whatever, is the direction of this thing that everything's about inflow of non-sewered water into the system that then can be pulled out in some mechanism, and therefore that extra capacity then therefore could be added to a mechanism to allocate it to whatever projects the town deems to be, beneficial to themselves and whatever.
I don't think that's the sole intent. That's one component of it. I think the other component is the ability to transfer it. So, for example, we saw the Applebee's close down in Drum Hill recently. That had a considerable, much greater flow than the current Chase Bank that is sitting there today.
Right.
And so, given that the town was able to accommodate the Applebee's, why not allow that transfer of that capacity to be assigned to another property owner who may be expanding? I'll give you a current example, not involving anybody in the room to my knowledge, but Bob's Coin Shop just closed recently. Now, obviously, a coin shop doesn't have much flow, but we had a discussion this morning with department heads and said, oh, well, if somebody wants to go in there and put a nail salon with 9 tables or, stations at a nail salon. Well, you know what? That's not going to fly, because the flow for a nail salon, although it's not, onerous in its abstract, is more than that would be done for the last 10 years of flow for Bob's Coin Shop. And so that's the idea, is that you're having changes of uses in your commercial district, in one case from a restaurant to a bank, and in this case from a coin shop to a nail salon, is why not allow that transfer amongst parties? And then to go to a more larger example, if you've got an office building on 129 that's going to convert to a less extensive use, why not allow that property owner to transfer a property, that sewer capacity, to a property in the center that is looking to expand perhaps from a current retail thing to a restaurant seating capacity, therefore needing more flow. And this is what we're seeing. And another example is on Fletcher Street. You have the old convenience store at the corner of the strip mall where Zesties is. They're converting from a convenience store to a little cafe. Same problem's going to exist. We'd have to limit their capacity to 14 seats, even though by the codes they could, meaning building codes, they could have, probably double the seating capacity if they could have the sewer capacity transfer. So I think, Richard, that's the objective, is that you're having a constant change by way of the economy in any community, but in this case, Chelmsford, of these different type of retail uses. Why not allow that transfer of capacity so that, again, in the aggregate, the town is held harmless, but it allows for those changing economic uses both ways.
Without adding septic.
Without adding septic. Oh,
Right,
yes, without adding
everything
septic.
is totally on the sewer.
Right, but without adding septic, but allowing for that change of flow, again, provided that the transfer wouldn't have any adverse impact in terms of the pipeline capacity or the pump station capacity. And in most of these cases, the levels aren't significant enough that's going to trigger that. So I don't want to just treat it just as I&I, Richard. I think it is the ability to move amongst the ever-changing uses of our commercial and retail space.
And to clarify, Paul, what you were saying,
Could you send a mic down at that end?
I'm going to be able to hear you or not.
to clarify what you were saying, my understanding is if that flow is transferred, and this is where I, as a health director, don't think it's a good idea, you transfer flow to another business, and now you've completely paralyzed that piece of property to ever go back to anything that it was before, because you're now deeding that property with that much less flow.
Well, first of all,
So if the bank failed, okay, that capacity for that building was the 10-year capacity for Applebee's. Now the bank fails. You've transferred that capacity somewhere else. The bank goes away, restaurant wants to go back in there, they can't. because they
Unless-
don't have the capacity.
unless they go acquire the capacity. Same thing could happen, Sue, if, let's say the Chase Bank is open for 10 years, okay, to the year 2032, and then the bank closes. DPW is going to say under our current sewer policy, your allocated flow is your last 10 years actual. And therefore, you can't expand to a restaurant because you don't have no longer have the assigned flow. So I don't see what the downside is of allowing, again, if the change is used to allow that type of transfer, provided that we document it and track it, and I would suggest that, I said, by deed restrictions and by DPW monitoring to do that, because otherwise we're going to run into these real-world situations such as I just described that are happening today and are going to happen in the future based on our circumstance.
So, with that example of the Applebee's, when they came to us with the proposal to build the bank, they specifically said that they expected that an additional building would be put back up into the space to fill out where the Applebee's was. So now what you're expecting them to do is sell off their sewer rights such that they can't put a second building in there. I can't see this working. I honestly cannot see why any property owner would sell off their development rights forever. If we had a solution, a plan, a realistic plan, that was going to get us back into a stable sewerage situation in X number of years, and this proposal had a midnight clause such that it expired when we became sewer stable, such that all of the sold sewer rights expired, and those properties were redeemed, I might be able to understand it. But the way it's drafted today, I can't believe that it is going to solve the problem. Putting it very simply.
Let me respond, Nancy. Nobody's compelling anybody to sell anything.
I
So
understand that.
if those people want to build another building and keep their capacity, they're welcome to do it. So nobody's compelling anybody to sell anything. And you're right, many may not take advantage of it. But why not those who choose to do it, allow them to take advantage of it? And I can tell you that we've been working for some time looking at medium and long-term sewer solutions in discussions with the Congresswoman's office and with the city of Lowell and others. There is no immediate horizon, solution on the horizon that one can point to. And so and quite frankly, the other question we're going to have, and we'll talk about it later, Nancy, I'm not sure the community wants to go there. In
Well,
terms
there is
of
that too.
unrestrained growth, and that's a whole other discussion.
That's a whole nother discussion.
Well,
Can you explain unrestrained growth? The comment.
Sure. In other words,
Or any
I'll
growth.
repeat the question,
the
because
question
Ken
is, what's
wasn't.
unrestrained growth? In other words, unlimited sewer capacity. Let's say tomorrow, as one of the options we're exploring, we could tie into the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority by way of the town of Burlington. We could run a pipe down Route 2 and tie in and have unrestricted sewer flow. Probably be quite expensive to run the pipe and also the MWR rates, but have unrestricted sewer capacity. What that's going to mean is you're going to continue to have unrestricted growth in the community, i.e. the MBTA community zoning that we're talking about 35 units per acre, the requested market demand that we're seeing for multifamily housing and other development. So the question that residents are going to have is that the community you want, and where do you want the community to go in the future? Do you want Chelmsford that's now 36,000 people to become 42,000, 45,000, what have you? Or would you prefer the option of the Westford model, which is no sewer capacity growth? We kind of like the character and the size and the nature of the community today, and we'll just deal with sewer, like they do in the town of Westford, which is, if it can be accommodated, fine. If not, we prefer that type of a community and size of the community. I don't know, that's not my place. I don't set policy for the community. It's not my place to make that decision, but I'm not taking for a given that, the town just wants the ability to sewer up whenever, forever it can and whenever it can into the foreseeable future. And that's the big constraint. I mean, that is the big question that hasn't been resolved. It's not clear in the master plan or the master plan revision of 2022 what the direction is of the community in terms of growth. So that's, in my mind, Ken, is the question about, well, what do you mean unrestrained growth?
I know what it is, I just want.
No, but I just wanted people to understand that, because I'm not so sure that, I mean, we as a select board were inundated with concerns about, truck traffic, we're inundated with concerns about the changing character of the community, growth, the residential fatigue of multifamilies, not to mention the school capacity limitations. And so the idea of introducing sewer into the equation, additional sewer of significant quantities, could present quite a challenge to this community. And I'm not going to presume that that's what the community wants.
In other words, if we build it,
they will come.
And that's, right now, there's a take
now we
break on
can't
it,
build.
right? We've got a break. But Paul, maybe, I'm just curious.
Microphone, please. Can you get closer?
Sorry, in my mind, I'm playing out the checker game that's in place right now. So let's say the Chase building, next year, they lose 10% of their sewer capacity. Right? Bob's Coin isn't going to get approved for a nail salon, so it's stuck where it is. So the buildings that want to increase won't be able to, but the ones that aren't using it each year are going to give up 10%. Is there a way to calculate that and say, okay, the give up that's been released, we can then reallocate?
No, and the reason for that is, under our sewer policy, there's allowed for expansion by 500 gallons per day for any property in the community. Any
How would
sewer
that be
connection.
different than if we put this in place?
What do you mean? How is that
There's
different?
still 500, even if we adopted this, you still can have expansion on houses for 500 gallons a day.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, if this wasn't approved, January 1st, you'd be able to look and say, Chase just give up 10%, a warehouse in 129 give up 10%, and on, but there's no new restaurants or nail salons going in. So we would be gaining some capacity each year at a rate of 10% per property.
But it's also, it's a 10-year rolling average, Ken. So even if they were down 10% next year, it doesn't mean they couldn't be up 15% the following year in that 10-year window. So it's not static.
So the 10% doesn't just go 90, 80, 70, 60,
No.
it's a 10-year
10-year
total
rolling
average. Okay. So there's the question of that, So it really does put us in a pickle of how do we encourage development in the town and redevelopment? But it's,
Again, I think that's
Microphone.
been always, excuse me, that's always been the question. Someone says, oh, we need redevelopment. Well, what we're saying today is the fact that redevelopment is that if you go to Bob's Coin Shop, too bad there's no redevelopment, because you decided to have a low-use flow, okay? Even though when, quote-unquote, the town did their original survey to create the capacity issues of what the sewer plan was going to be, kind of gave everybody a
Title V number.
a capacity kind of thing as they
Right.
went by those different zone kinds of properties. Now all of a sudden it's like, well, if I had a low use thing, now in the future I'm going to get zinged because I had a low use, or the guy on the street, such as I guess a good example of the water districts can tell me that the highest water user in town is that Cintas?
Cintas.
The uniform company? Is that
Probably.
Probably the
That makes
biggest. I mean, they do laundry for, things, so I'm assuming they're like, for their size, they're huge. Well, here they are, they got this huge capacity.
That they paid for.
Oh, yeah, no. But they paid for, but they got it approved as part of the package of the sewage treatment plant that went in for that entire drive when they first came in. But that's what I'm saying, is that people came into the town, did their business, set up businesses and whatever, and they were in town during the hard years, and then they paid for a sewer project, or assisted paying for a long-term 30-year sewer project. And then all of a sudden, at the other end of the thing, there's these little things that are being pushed and pulled and whatever. And again, I understand the squeeze that the town is in, okay? But whether we like it or not, we're coming to a squeeze, whether it's sewer, whether it's water, whether it's utilities, whatever. It's all coming to a squeeze, and therefore the town, I think, is going to have to make some decisions, as you were mentioning, about the last master plan kind of thing for the town. Is what does the town really want to be? Do they want to be a Westford? Do they want to be a Burlington? Whatever you want to talk about. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. That's not the point. But when you come to kind of the end of that run, okay, and all your utilities are at question. The grid, how well the grid can continue to give us power, how long the gas can give us power, how long, right down the line, all the massive utilities. That, as you were saying, we can't go to this unlimited sewer thing that just means grow, 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 grow. And the MWRA that somehow thinks that it's just their cities and whatever, they can just do whatever they want, and they just boom, boom, bing, bing, and pump it out to the ocean, and everything's hunky-dory kind of thing. It's a problem, but the reality is that we're coming to a wall of sorts, and we have to absorb what that, the term that I would give it is, the population and the growth and other things come to a stabilized point. And as I said, redevelopment should be a sort of a tit for tat, but a tit for tat where someone that's been doing the right things and lowering their water usages, and since we're talking about water and therefore the sewer usage, doesn't get penalized for whatever. So this trading thing, now again, I clearly support, and I think the whole infiltration component of this thing here definitely has benefits. And similar to what the gentleman engineer from 250 Apollo was saying, that let's show our developments coming forward and not just not taking out an illegal connection, okay, that never should have been there. I mean, someone's tying in storms, things from sump pumps or whether roof leaders or whatever it may be that's getting in there, putting in low flow things, doing all these water conserving things. So basically it says, well, the water department over the next blank number of years doesn't need as much water. The population is kind of leveled out, which by the way, I mean, looking at the town that I moved into, it stayed at a level population there for a long
time.
25, almost 30 years, where we hit that sort of 30,000 mark, and it just kind of stayed there for a long period of time. And I'll tell you, what was the restriction of that? I know firsthand, it was septic systems. You only could do what we could put in the ground, and where we can put it in the ground, and how we can put it in the ground. In 86, I believe, roughly, when the sewer project started, kind of thing, and then went for the next 30 years, it kind of opened things up again. And therefore, we got into this bigger increases in, not so much in residential initially, but then we did get into more and more of it. But all of a sudden, we started to get this growth again, kind of thing, because the sewer opened up new avenues of things and whatever. Well, that scenario is now come to, well, this is how much you got.
Cycle.
Live with it, okay? And that's sort of, where we are. So it's not that I disagree with anybody's point about, well, can we do the shuffling, whatever, but the net of it, going back and forth, in first of all, I also agree, I don't think many people would sign off their capacities. They're really crazy as a property owner to sign off that capacity.
Let's take that part off the table, because that's nobody's decision in this room to make.
Absolutely.
So the fundamental, so the II, Paul and the DPW are working on that.
Yes.
The low flow incentives, I know Weston and Sampson has previously recommended we look at that. I think Paul, is the DPW looking at some kind of incentive program for that as well?
Be open to that.
Right.
Okay, so the discussion right now
Yes.
is the sewer capacity credit transfer policy.
Yes.
And I think what Paul's looking for, and thank you for also clarifying, Paul, this is a policy that would be implemented by the DPW. It's not a policy implemented by the select board. And what we've been trying to do is facilitate the development of the policy and helping to get feedback on it, on whether or not this is something that the stakeholders in this room would be supportive of or not. Whether or not a a commercial property owner chooses to participate is up to them. But I think what we were trying to do, we went through the sewer bank draft policy, and the major concerns that came up from that were related to septic, potentially affecting the water quality. And so we took a step back and we said, well, we're in the bind that we're in. The long-term solution is very, very, very long down the road. And is there something that we can do to help our commercial and industrial property owners and help the town with whatever economic development can come from that within the bounds of what we've got in terms of land, facilities, and sewer capacity? And so really the fundamental question is, I think, Paul, what you're asking is, are you supportive of the concept of this policy? And if the majority of people are supportive of that, then I think the intent is that Paul will finish going to work the details with DPW and legal counsel. Have I stated that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct.
In Virginia,
Okay.
if one of the parties here is for it, why they're for it, what they like about it, and if they're against it specifically,
Right.
how does it affect their department and why are they against it?
Right, how does it affect you and what you're responsible for the town, right? We can't control whether a property owner is gonna, if property owners want to engage in it, the intent was give them the opportunity. If you're cynical that nobody's ever gonna engage in it, well, that's fine. I mean, we've lost a little bit of labor putting the policy together, but at least there's something there to help facilitate some of the revitalization efforts and things like that that are happening in town. So that's where we're at. I don't know if people have other concerns or comments they want to bring forward, or if it would make sense for me to just go around the room.
Can I ask, Virginia, before you do go around the room?
Yep.
Pass her the microphone.
Sorry.
One thing that, in looking at this policy, that as the health director, I would like clarification on, because through my department, this is absolutely going to affect me, because it's a question of septic versus, tying into sewer and where things happen. This is not septic, I
Right, there's no
understand that.
septic.
But on the second page, and this was color-coded, so I don't know who made what comments based on the colors, but the paragraph that's written in purple,
Oh, she's looking at the DPW
DPW
comments,
comments, sure.
Paul, which
Okay, yep.
no, I don't think any of us
Yep.
have really reviewed yet.
Okay, go ahead.
I just really would like clarification on what that whole paragraph means, because to me, I can't even understand what that means.
Which paragraphs?
The purple
purple one.
paragraph.
One that-
Mine's in black and white, so.
The one,
Oh.
one that says the developer property owner must request a
Got it.
specified number of
Page
sump
2 on
pumps.
the second doc.
Yes.
Starts with to obtain sewer capacity credits.
This one here.
The box on
And then
the,
on the right, there's a whole, there's things that say that this was all
Paul, could you just
deleted.
clarify, I mean, we've had these drafts around for a long time, so what are we doing?
No, these,
Where did all these comments come from all of a sudden?
when, if you recall, next to the last select board meeting, basically the meeting in November, when we brought forward this draft policy, part of the presentation for tonight was to circulate this policy and request that any written comments be
But I
submitted.
thought DPW already reviewed this many times.
They hadn't reviewed this revised policy that I
Okay,
drafted.
so go ahead and answer the question.
Go ahead, Tony.
Just for clarification, you're asking about where it has the to obtain the sewer capacity credits
Yes.
written in purple.
Yes, totally.
Points 1 through 4.
Yes.
So that would just be the procedure for an I&I removal. That the way it was written, it looked like it was the developer that was coming to the town with the amounts that they had, and I had reworded it so that the developer property owner had to come to the town and request the amount. That with a pilot program that we're looking to be running through DPW, we would have the houses that would be connected to the sump pumps that would be connected, so then we would be able to say, this is the ones that you'd have to do, this is the amount of flow for each one, and that way we'd be tracking the amount that's in it. So that is in point number 1. And it has a plus minus 500 or 400 gallons per day on average. That's just a rough number, just a holding place for what a sump pump would be. Would have to do a little bit more working with our consultant on what an actual number would be. That was just the idea for that. For number 2, it was just DPW would then assign the properties as they were listed, so that it wouldn't be able to pick or choose where they were or how difficult they would be located. It would be kind of as we discover them, and it'd be in a running list. Point number 3 would be the developer requiring the redirect property that they're assigned, that's regardless of the difficulty. Excuse me, 2 would assign the properties, 3 is just regardless of difficulty, you kind of get the properties that you're assigned to, so there's no favoritism, it's just working off that running list that would be developed. And then point 4 is that they'd agree to a sump pump connection design criteria, and that's something that we're working on currently on what would have acceptable plans, the amount that would be done, how they would tie in, whether it was to a catch basin, a drain manhole, infiltration system out in the backyard, things of that nature. And so that'd be a separate document that just kind of went through what those procedures or policies would be.
Okay, and why was the section on the right deleted? It just seems to me, and I only, got this recently and saw the different comments, but why were those the documents that would have had to be provided in order for this to work, why were those all deleted from this?
It's not that they were deleted, it had it that a property owner developer would be presenting us, it seemed like they were presenting the town with these are the properties we want to do, instead of the town maintaining the list and working through our pilot program. So it was just changing the way that it was worded. The way that it was worded before was that someone would approach DPW with what they wanted to do versus us maintaining a list and then these are what you'd be assigned.
Okay.
So it's just kind of a change on how it was written.
So, to follow up on that, so the word amnesty, I'm making an assumption, you're looking at finding out who in town is illegally connected, a sump pump, things from the roof, whatever, okay, and you're gonna make a list of them.
Yes.
Okay. Now, isn't what they're doing already a violation of something and punishable by enforcement? No, I'm not saying how we approach the problem. I'm just saying, I was just trying to figure out that if you have someone who is illegally doing something and I guess either you somehow, and not you personally, you, quote unquote, the town runs into it. Okay, what's been the policy like today? If I was working for the town and I went out into someone's place and found a sump pump tied into the sewer line, what would we do?
We'd order it removed.
Right.
Right, but we don't have a policy, nor do we have the right to go into somebody's home and say, let us into your basement, we want to see if you have an illegal sump pump. And so I think that's the critical difference, Richard, is we'd offer a program. Nobody installs a sump pump because they like to.
No.
They're installing a sump pump because they have a water problem in their basement.
Right.
And two things could have happened. It may not even been them as a property owner. It could have been the previous person who owned the property.
Yeah.
Or it could have been the builder or whomever. But regardless, the point is, right now, if we find somebody who's illegally connected, we disconnect them.
Right.
And then I think we'd follow up with a follow-up inspection. But in reality is, somebody could go reverse that at a future time, and without us, how will we know? We're not going to go into 9,000 properties, single-family homes in the community, and determine who has sump pumps and who doesn't. But what we do see evidence of is that there are properties that appear to be doing that because of our flows data. And so therefore, the reality is dealing with the real situation out in the field. Is there an opportunity where we can go out there and address a community sewer problem by assisting those who have an illegal sewer connection to rectify that to directing that water to the stormwater, which actually would help the community because then it would recharge the groundwater in the aquifer. And so, yes, they kind of benefit, quote unquote, because they had an illegal activity, but on the other hand, it actually provides a greater benefit to the community.
Okay. No, but I was just trying to figure out that this is definitely a new way of looking at the I&I scenario.
Yes.
Okay? And that you're looking to.
You have a question?
I'm not saying how, but.
No, I'm just going to say, and our DPW director has done a program like this before in communities closer to Boston.
Okay.
So it's not a new idea, it's not a new concept.
Okay.
Basically, it's a program where you say to every resident, listen, if you're doing what we consider an illegal activity, or you're environmentally friendly and you want to just get your runoff out of the sewer system and back regenerating our aquifers, the town's got a program. And step forward and we'll help you out.
Okay. I'm gonna go around the participants if we're ready to do that. And if you could just say whether you are philosophically supportive of having this credit capacity, and if not, why not? I think that would help give Paul the input that you're looking
Like,
for.
we rule out I don't think anybody will take it.
And if you're agnostic to it, you can just pass when I call on you if you're here for some other agenda item. Ken, let's start with you.
I'm for the policy, obviously, I've been involved in it.
Okay,
I think it's probably the best short-term solution we have to bringing up some capacity. And if we can do incentives for low-flow toilets, things like that, I mean, some of these buildings in town that you go into, office buildings, you use the bathroom and they're flushing, 2-3 gallons of water every time,
Yep.
even if you just use a urinal, and to me, if you can recapture all that waste, then that's the only way we're gonna keep the population comfortable and growing, and if we encourage this type of behavior, so I'm for it.
Mike?
I'm also for it, supportive of it.
Okay. Andy?
The district would have no qualms. It's
Okay.
fine.
Thank you. Pat?
I mean, this is a tough one, because obviously we want to have more capacity. I favor doing something with the illegal inflow. Philosophically, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of opposed to just blanket amnesty for people who know that they have been doing something illegal for years, and would encourage there to be some kind of penalty, even if, it's the property owner pays part of the cost for the correction. I'm also philosophically opposed to basically trading credits here. I mean, it's a utility. We're going to start trading the water capacity from business to business. So there's some parts of it I agree with and some parts that I don't.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
I agree with the policy, what we have written up, but one thing to look at too is I'm in the trade of heating and air conditioning. You have condensate that can be, average house, I have no idea, but I'm gonna guess 20 gallons in a summer day. Wintertime, probably 10 on high efficiency units. And everybody's upgrading to high efficiency units, water heaters, furnaces, they all produce condensate.
They all
The way
produce what?
The way people get rid of the condensate varies. Some pump it out into the yard, some go into say like a washing machine disposal.
Okay.
So that's an area where you can pick up some, that could be infiltration.
Nancy?
I'm a mixed bag, kind of like Pat. I'm in favor of the general principles, with the exception of this trading or selling off credits. I would like to see an expansion of individual properties getting credit for conservation on their property in exchange for expansion capabilities. Because there's a whole lot that can be done on the existing properties to lower their current use that would give them more capability to use that in an expansion. I think the selling and buying or trading off of capacity credits gives our developers a false sense of expectations for being able to develop. And from a planning board standpoint, I think that's a bad thing. I just don't want them. It seems like smoke and mirrors from that standpoint.
Thank you. Mike?
Well, I'm in favor of the policy, but only very mildly. The trading aspect of this is interesting. I have no fundamental objection to it, but I don't see how it's going to be particularly effective in a large amount. But there's no harm in trying it. I think the big bucks, if you will, or at least the big savings, are in dealing with all the various sorts of water that enters the sewer system that doesn't come in from the water mains. I would like to know if we have any even remote estimate as to how much potentially we can save. We can save 10%. We're there. If we can save 20, good God, we're in great business. So that's my comment for the moment, so.
Mark?
Yeah, I am definitely in support of this concept as a first step. I think that anytime we put any policy in place, that it's going to evolve as we get into it, as we come across different scenarios, like the one the gentleman from Apollo Drive brought forward. That's certainly something to be thinking about. I also think it's really important that we put something in place to help to support, again, the master plan with some development downtown in order to not just shut that whole thing down. The other thing, too, is not just supporting the development, but also, I still think we need a little bit more of a buffer against our maximum limit here. We have an 11% variability. I don't know what the normal, in a perfect world, what the variability of flows would be, but there's an 11% variability from what's been stated to us here. And if you look at that, plus if you took a look at the stack up of the vacancy, if that were to go to zero, and I know that's not practical, but if you looked at it, you're considerably over the 3.01. So we do need more buffer at the same time. So if we can do anything to put a policy in place like this, but also offer incentives for low flow, for different things, I think they're all good moves for the town to make.
George?
Yeah.
Microphone, please.
Yeah, I'm in favor of it. I was impressed with the gentleman from Apollo Drive. I think he was, they've approached it through like using gray water and the low flush toilets. And I'm not really for selling off, the permits or the usage, but I don't think anybody would really go for it anyway. You're going to just to value your property, but so I mean, to me, it's kind of a mute question. But I'd like to see. I thought he had a lot of great ideas, and so I'm for the project.
Thank you. Sue?
I support the part of the project that deals with the I&I, but I do not agree with the selling, trading of, transfer of credits.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, I'm in supportive of the proposal.
Okay. Richard?
Yeah, I'm in support of the I&I, but as the general vote from the Board of Health on Monday, that the other component, the trading thing, it's just shuffling things around, and I don't think there's any benefit to it. Whether anybody uses it or not, that's secondary. But the fact is, I don't think that's there. So, but the I&I part, a very aggressive I&I part, I think, is where we can actually see some real numbers, and because, like he says, if we ever get back to occupancy of these buildings, at the same time we have a few hundred property owners out there that are residential that haven't tied into sewer yet because of what they call large offsets to the street. And at that point in time, they didn't have to tie in like everybody else. So they have to have the capacity to tie back in. So, and I think he's right in the fact that we need a bigger buffer and we need some real numbers to create this buffer. And I think the I&I is the only true realistic numbers that might pop up and help this town. But the other thing I think is just shuffling things around. So.
Okay. Tim Shanahan?
I support the project.
Okay. Anita Tonini? We'll come back to Anita. Bruce Harper? Bruce, you're on mute. You went from unmuted to muted.
Hello?
Yep, I'm in. Yeah, I support the I&I. I also support the low-flow fixtures, selling the transfer capacity. I don't think it'll work. I don't think the property owners will sell it off. That's just my opinion. I do got a question I'd like to throw out there.
Excuse me, Bruce, if the credit policy were to be implemented, I understand you don't think it'll work, but does the water department have a concern with that from the water department's perspective?
No, I think we actually really haven't discussed it much, but I don't think they really have any concerns on that. I think they support the credits.
Okay.
But one thing I want to throw out there, and I don't know if this will work or not, but UMass Lowell, where they're going to build 391 apartment buildings up there, I think it's 391. They're going to build a wastewater facility. Is there any possibility that the town could look at possibly tying in maybe like the Weed Street pump station to that, if they build a big enough capacity station to free up sewer capacity? I don't know if they could re-pump in that direction. Just something I was thinking about as we were speaking.
Okay. We have a lot of head shaking no here, but I think it's, we'll make a note of the comment. Bill, is that it, Bruce?
That's it for me, yes.
Thank you. Bill Martin?
Yeah, the Chelmsford Water District doesn't have any opposition to the I&I portion. We had a brief discussion about the credits, and we'd like to have a further discussion about that before we weigh in on it. Thank you.
Anita?
Hi, I'm in favor of the I&I, but I am not in favor of buying, selling credit. I like to get a little bit more information of who else is doing it and what administrative costs this would entail. I've got concerns that this could kind of blow up, and even aside from people not doing it, but if people did do it, it could get messy and cost us more things out a year. So,
can you address
like I
that?
said, I'm in favor of the I&I, but that's about as far as I would go.
Your concern is on administrative cost?
Just like this whole thing, it just seems like, then who's monitoring what's being sold? How do we track that? How do we make sure that people aren't going above that? I like to see what other towns are doing and make sure that whatever we do has worked elsewhere before we start putting something like that in. Yeah.
Did you want to say anything, Paul? Okay. I think I'm the last border committee member, so I'll speak and then I'll just poll who's left from the town here. I'm in support of the concept of this and what we're doing. I'm still not clear on what our remaining capacity is, and I'd really like to get some clarity on that, and I was planning to talk about that more when we get to the long-term sewer capacity objectives. I think, it came up to me again in this conversation because we also had a good comment during public input about whether or not we could take a portion of our remaining capacity and say we're going to hold that for economic development, but it's still not clear to me. Whenever we talk about what capacity do we have left, the answer seems to be it varies. It depends on rain flow and all that kind of stuff. But there must be a way to just kind of do the math to say, this is the number of residential buildings we have, and they're allowed to go up to 500 gallons per day for additions in law apartments or whatever, so that we know that our residential capacity is X on paper. And these are the commercial industrial buildings we have, and we know basically what their sewer allocation is because we calculate that and we keep those records. So it seems like there should be some way to quantify what is our capacity, and our best guess conservatively is here's where we're at relative to our total capacity. I also thought there was a comment made during public input about using Title V versus actuals, and I admit I have absolutely no expertise in this area, but if the numbers are that drastically different, maybe that does warrant a look by the DPW and sewer experts. And then the low flow incentives, I know this is it has come up in the past, but Paul, maybe we should take a harder look at kind of the low flow incentive aspect to see if we can free up some capacity that way. So let me finish going around the attendees. John from Weston and Sampson, do you have anything else you want to add? Okay, Mike?
I think the sewer department's concern is actually using good numbers. We float a lot of numbers around and they vary greatly. So before making a decision how it affects the sewer system, the gravity lines, the pressure lines, the pump stations, I need hard numbers. And without hard numbers, we're just spinning a roulette wheel and just seeing where it comes out. So that's our concern, is how is it going to affect the infrastructure, the sewer infrastructure. Other than that, I have no opinion one way or the other. We can make something work, but again, what I see, it involves more than just a few departments. Anything internal to a house is under the purview of the plumbing inspector of the building department. All right? Anything connecting to a catch basin is stormwater. So it involves more than just the sewer department, because we can't tell somebody how to connect inside their house. As mentioned earlier, we can't go into somebody's house unless we get invited. And that's a rare occurrence. You know, it's usually a sewer problem that we can see, and if we do see a sump pump, we do mention, and perhaps write a letter saying that you have an illegal connection, please disconnect it. So, other than that, I think there is a possibility of coming up with some capacity. The number, I can't put a number on it. There's too many variables. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony?
I don't have any comment.
Evan?
Just briefly, I would suggest that the town should be exploring any and all options that don't cost a lot of burden on the town, admin resources and financial resources, but that allow market opportunity.
Thank you. Paul Pires or Pires, did I miss you? I don't think I...
At this point right now, I have no comment.
Okay, thank you. And Christine Clancy?
I'd like to, I guess, comment on the amount that we have left. And Tony was running some numbers earlier today. We've been talking about this, and it is variable year to year. And that's why I think we can look to see some reductions of inflow removal. Just looking back at our 7-year history, going back to 2015, and if we were, so in our sewer moratorium, we have allowed people to increase when they do any change or redevelopment up an additional 500 gallons per day. So the question is, the question that Tony and I talked about is how many times could we allow 500 gallons per day increase? Looking at the actual flows. And that, looking at a 7-year history, that I think, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 225 times. So that is a finite number that forever, until we have a longer term solution, we will come across, we will come up to our max, our overall usage after 225 times, which whether that be the next couple of years, 5 years, 10 years. So that does put it into perspective that we do have a number of times that we can make those increases.
Okay. Bruce Harper has his hand up again.
Yeah, I just want to put a comment out there, Virginia, that Paul Pires is taking over for me. I'm retiring January 1st, so I just want to introduce Paul Pires as the new superintendent for the North Chelmsford Water District going forward.
Thank you. Congratulations, Bruce, and welcome, Paul.
John Harrington's in the room, in the back. He's a district commissioner.
John Harrington, did you have anything you want to add? No? You're welcome to come have a seat at the table. It's more fun back there, huh?
Just didn't want to overlook him. Fine.
Okay, so Paul, where would you like to take this next? Do you want to take the comments under consideration and then come back with where you're going to?
Well, I mean, the consensus that I see in the room is to move forward. What I'm seeing, it's very clear there's unanimous support for additional I&I approaches, as well as low flow fixtures and so forth, and we'll work with our public works director and sewer superintendent and town engineer and others to pursue those. But I also saw majority support for the transfer capacity credits, and so I will work with the DPW to finalize that policy with town council, and then I'll report back to the board with the final plan if DPW director is going to implement it.
And as you do that, could you go through kind of the punch list of comments that were brought up here and address as much as you can?
And I think the other thing that we would do is, if that were to be implemented, then I would think we'd have a reporting mechanism to the board of select board, the DPW through the select board, of when such, changes take place. So at least there's an awareness amongst the board and the community about, well, like you said, how often is this being used, what's going on, so that it's just not a departmental thing that nobody's cognizant of what's going on. So I will work on that. Thank you, and I appreciate everybody's input.
So before we walk off on that, so we have another public input segment next on the agenda, and I want to open it up first for any public input related to the discussion we just had, if there is any.
So I just have, I'm sorry.
You got to be at the mic again, thank you.
Jimmy Inley, Civil Design Consultants for 250 Apollo. Two questions. One would be, it looks like you got positive feedback on the policy and the credit. Timing-wise, we're kind of in the middle here, and we're really in a holding pattern to try to move this forward. Do you have a sense for how this moves forward?
My hope would be to have this done beginning of January.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the select board is scheduled to meet on the 9th of January. We're scheduled to meet, on the 19th of this month. I'm not sure I'd have it done by the 19th, which would be a week from Monday, but I would expect to have it by January 9th, which is their following meeting, basically the first of the year, and get this thing moving out there, because I do realize that there are a number of projects that are literally in this decision mode where they need a determination of direction real soon. And so I guess, recognizing the holidays, so again, less than a month.
Okay, terrific. And then the other question I would have is does DPW at this point have a list of properties that they're aware of that we could proactively move forward to and begin to plan that?
No, but that's something that I'll be discussing with the director, or the superintendent, and the engineer in terms of how can we jumpstart that in terms of estimates. And in other words, and that was a question that was raised by our consulting engineers. Could somebody make a cash payment in lieu of that? And I think that's something that we're actively going to, that would allow things to move forward.
Okay.
Because we know they exist. We just, like I said, we don't want to drag it out.
Okay, thank you.
In the Zoom room, we have Badri. And just, Badri, a reminder for the record, your name and address, please.
Hi, from Garage Lane. Giving input as a resident, I think it's important to consider the long-term goals. I know there's a crunch here in terms of the short-term, but I think I&I and low flow and other measures to reduce sewage in residential properties is going to be a critical long-term practice that I think the policy should heavily weight. I certainly don't, as a resident, think that enabling for the creation of septic or other sewer credits is a good plan. This also gels with the concept of sustainability, and we don't know what the future holds in terms of water capacity or water availability. So making sure that infrastructure such as low flow toilets, low flow showers, and just reduced outflows and consumption of water by itself, and even a study on what the sewer and water rates could do to reduce demand for the usage of the system, thereby keeping the overall capacity of treatment that's required maintained, so that it doesn't happen that in 2035 or something like that, we see either a jump in the amount of that we need to use, or we need to put out a much larger amount of money to a Lowell or some other processing facility at that time. So we need to get on the.
Thank you, Badri.
Right, thanks.
Is there any other public input?
Hi. Bobby Moulton, the owner of Black Rhinestone. Question with the bank policy would be, how is that going to be regulated? Is that free market? Is that, you know, the purchase and the swap of flow, am I up against, you know, deeper pockets, or how is that gonna work? And can you monopolize that process too? I mean, if you're a large builder, can you go around just acquiring other people's flow?
The only mechanism that I know that's most effective is the free market. I don't see how the town can get into doing a regulatory scheme of otherwise, in terms of, you know, as we said, as we've heard tonight, there's a skepticism of how many people are going to want to give up capacity in the case of transfer of capacity. I just don't see how the town gets into the middle of that transaction.
Well, I certainly have an idea for that, and I think it was mentioned to me early is basically a queue process, right? If you're in the queue, you know, you have first dibs into the sewer bank policy. Otherwise, I think free market approach is a recipe for chaos, and certainly could lead to other legal issues for the town moving forward.
You want to take a look at it, Paul?
Yeah, we can look into it. I just think that in a dynamic world where developments are happening in real time, I don't know how we could manage a queuing process when, you know, for example, we've heard this evening the projects are looking to make decisions. I don't know how we'd be able to manage that given the dynamic of development. But anyway, we'll take that into consideration.
So Paul, you got property.
Could you get to the mic, Nancy?
Yeah.
Yeah, get to the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. You have developers here that are looking to build that need those sewer credits. How many credits do you have available for them at this time?
0.
So you have to accumulate those credits before they can acquire them to go forward.
Right, and as I said, we may look at a payment in lieu of in the short term.
Okay.
And I think as was noted earlier, this is going to be a dynamic policy. What may get written and effective as of January X date may not, you know, will evolve over time.
Mr. Walton's still there. I don't think he was done.
No, and I think in both our cases, we're not talking, I mean, in the case of the Central Square property, we're talking about truly a rounding error.
Right. That's why I said the short term may be just a payment in lieu of. Right. In the short term.
Okay.
Most likely would be.
Got it, okay. No.
Yeah, because it will take time to get
Exactly.
the I&I
Exactly.
program up,
Exactly.
running, and people coming forward.
What will the payment be applied to?
It would be put in the bank. And one of the things that the people may not realize is we have a sewer capacity fund of over $3 million that's been developed over the years. And Richard knows, he was part of it, I think, when it was implemented.
Yeah.
Those funds can be used for I&I as well as purchasing and acquiring additional sewer capacity.
That's what the money's for, Sue.
That's what the money's
It costs
for.
the town to go to someone's house. If it's take the sub pump, you know, out of the ground, or dig a well, or what, it's gonna cost money. So those fees would go towards the town investing in those homes to get the I&I out.
So I think that's how we would track it, yeah.
Right, we don't want it to cost the
Okay.
town a ton of money to go around and unplug all these illegal sub pumps. So we'll make them pay for it.
Is there any other public input? Do we have any public input on the next topic, which is, Leanne, were you trying to say something on this one?
Yeah, I was just going to ask a question.
Okay, go ahead quickly.
Could we use those funds to support a discounted program for replacing toilets and showers and
Yes.
that type of things?
But could you specifically?
Microphone, Mike. I mean, Ken.
I think, so, I mean, I know like the Mass Save program's gone around a lot of houses. My house already has low-flow toilets and low-flow shower heads, and I've done what I can. I think you're gonna get the bigger bang for your buck to use that, open that money up also to commercial. Because there is no incentive for my building owner, who has 6 toilets in our building that are from the 1980s.
Yeah.
There's no incentive for them to change those.
But there might be, and this came up earlier, the incentive is the wallet. One of the things that we may want to consider is graduated sewer rate tier system. This town has a graduated water rate tier system. If you hit certain thresholds, you pay more in your water consumption. We have a flat sewer rate system. And I think one of the things that I intend to discuss with the DPW director is to look towards a graduated sewer tiering system, which is most common in other communities. So why should the resident, who's, an elderly couple, in a, Campanelli Ranch be paying the same sewer rate as a larger user, who's commercial or otherwise? That's what happens with water consumption. And it's something that I think we need to seriously look at because that will encourage conservation.
I think we're at the point of any and all options. Exactly. I mean, it's dire, so we need to consider all.
I'm gonna go back on track here, because the hours or minutes are going away here. Is there any public input on water supply quality and protection before we begin that discussion?
Take me with you tomorrow.
Okay, if not, Paul, I'm going to let you introduce this one as well. I know this was a request that we had, I believe, from at least one of the water departments.
Yeah.
John Harrington, if you'd like to come join us at the table, you're welcome to.
Since all John's,
I think
John's by himself now.
But let's keep going, Paul.
All right. Underneath all of this, and perhaps this brought it to the surface, is the concern about water supply quality and protection. We've been dealing with this, and I think it was helpful to have the discussion this evening. We are hearing loud and clear about the number of factors, external such as PFAS, which the everywhere contaminant that's naturally occurring now, I guess better way to describe it, meaning ever present in water bodies, the North Pole, everywhere else. And then also the more local is the issue of the water supply and the aquifer protection within the community, and the concern regarding protecting the water supply, which again was the inherent nature of developing the sewer system to begin with. And we have our water superintendent here from online, we have one in person and so forth, and so the goal is to discuss, how do we protect the water supply? They have concerns, and I think Richard noted earlier, it isn't unlimited water either. There have been concerns with the regulatory aspects in terms of how much they can draw down from particular well fields because of the groundwater concerns and the environmental concerns for fisheries and so forth. And then there's also the concerns of what impact does septic systems, whether it's at the, a packaged treatment plant such as the UMass West campus, or something such as Charles Way, where they've got a subdivision and it's beyond their capacity, so they're putting in septic systems, or on Dunstable Road, or the proposed expansion that we heard earlier tonight regarding Billerica Road. So that's a concern that we want to talk about is, what steps do we need to do to ensure water supply quality and protection of the precious resource. And how we're seeing this, and why this is a macro issue, I'll finish up, is we were notified within the last month or just so about an effort that we were invited to participate to join or explore connections to the MWRA water supply. And there are communities in the North Shore of Boston who have never been part of the MWRA, the Quabbin Reservoir that comes in, who are looking at the ability, can they now connect to the MWRA because of they seem to have an ample water supply. And that extension came all the way up here to the Route 3 corridor to, Chelmsford and so forth, about whether we want to go there. So you can see this issue of water supply and water quality is very paramount today. I don't know if Andy, I'll pass it off to you, to start off the concerns.
Yeah, I think where this all started from was the original policy putting septic into Zone 2 or thereabouts. So we were happy to see that change. So we support that part of the policy wholeheartedly. As far as water supply, what I would just say in brevity is we're always concerned what's going into the groundwater for obvious reasons. I did share with Paul that many communities are looking at MWRA. The district, and I just wanted to couch this so people understand this, it doesn't mean the district wants to go to MWRA, but we're also cognizant if we're looking 50 to 100 years out, where's the water coming from? And if growth does come at some point in time, there may be a need for some water. Many of our sister communities are looking at MWRA just because of, it takes a lot of land, it takes a significant amount of money to develop a supply. So that's why it was out there. It's going to be in the news. We had shared it just so it wouldn't be a surprise. Again, it doesn't mean that's the way we're going. It's just one of the many options that we're considering. So.
And sort of to tie it back to the sewer discussion, if the town were to put in a sewage treatment plant, the federal and state regulators no longer allow you to discharge to a water body. So as we've talked before, you can't just build a plant at Southwell and just discharge into the Merrimack River like downstream in the Lowell plant or upstream at the Hampshire plants. Any sewer treatment system today that would be constructed would have to have discharge into the ground. And so again, so if the town were to explore a sewer treatment plant within the community, that would have to discharge into the groundwater, into the groundwater. And so, and I think that, should be noted again, which is why I've just raised it, is that, that may be a concern because whether it's in, zone 2 or outside of zone 2, that's something that we have to be mindful of.
And I would add to that, we would potentially welcome water back into the aquifer. It's just a matter of how it's treated and how far you go.
It leaves the plant, it's treated.
The microphone,
But
please,
it's
Paul.
not treated to drinking water quality.
But
Paul, the microphone, please.
Oh, sorry.
Would that quality hurt the ground water? No. It's made to go into the ground, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So the problem is, and I'm just using just one example, so PFAS was a game changer, and it's in such small quantities that a conventional wastewater treatment plant would not address that. So what I'm trying to say is if the town comes to a point that they want to put water back into the ground, we just have to spend some time talking about what does that water quality look like. That's all.
Anything from the North Chelmsford Water District?
I think Andy covered everything. Virginia, him and I actually discussed a lot of this yesterday at a meeting, Andy and I and Paul and Rob Conroy. So we're all on the same page as Andy just discussed.
The question that I'll have is, as was mentioned earlier, we had the UMass West Campus project approved, and they're putting in a package treatment plant. And then we're also staring at the face of this MBTA zoning that also talks about high density and it has to be allowed by right. If somebody were able to acquire the necessary real estate in the MBTA zone district, wherever that may be determined, I know that works to come in the near future, would they then have the similar rights to construct a package treatment plant as their means of wastewater treatment? I don't know, John, do you have a thought on that, or if it's, because it seems like what we heard on the UMass West Campus project was, hey, that's out of the town's domain, right? They have a right to go directly to the state for package treatment plant connection.
Not completely, no.
Because it wasn't,
Over the 10,000 gallons.
it's over 10,000 gallons, right?
It requires their approval, but it also requires our approval.
I don't believe it did, Richard. I don't believe,
Give Sue a microphone.
yeah.
We haven't given.
Oh, wait, what?
We didn't give approval on that, Richard, because the state took it over.
But so I just raised a concern to just make the community aware, because that is something, and again, just while we're at the table, that's something that may be in the future, because we are being, what the right word is, we are being directed by state law to adopt MBTA zoning. And there are a few communities that are digging in their heels, but it's not clear that those half dozen or 8 communities that are digging in their heels are going to be able to survive, because it's not a option. It's not a local option. It's a state directive, and with a new governor and new administration and the direction of the state to encourage housing development for a variety of reasons, I just want to point out the fact that we may, as a community, may be challenged in the foreseeable future with this package treatment plant alternative. And again, I just wanted to note your concerns, and I'm not sure if that even can override the Aquifer Protection District.
Yeah, I mean, again, the obvious issue is this MBTA, whatever thing you're talking about. If the state wants this, okay, and kind of dictating it to everybody, then okay, regionally improve all the regional sewage treatment plants and give the capacity for this type of development go, and then it's done. But no, they pass it over, and then they pass it over, and then they pass it over and say, oh, it's town's problem, but we mandated it. Well, you can't mandate it unless you're willing to pay for it.
Just one second. Paul, that might be something to queue up too when we have our legislators come in January.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or Richard Day for state rep.
Yes. Yeah.
Nan wants to say something, and then I'll go to Evan.
Yeah, I have a question, because we have probably the right people around the table. As we determine where to put the MBTA overlays, what I'm hearing is that one of the things that we should take into consideration, besides, road capacity and water capacity and such, is to keep it out of the aquifer protection districts. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Go ahead. No, I've said too much.
Yes, well, I mean,
I'd like to speak to that as well.
it seems like it seems like what I'm hearing here is that we really need to make sure that we do not locate it in aquifer protection districts.
Unless the state turns around and says, okay,
Well,
you have a problem.
since that hasn't happened.
Give us the sewer capacity zone, don't do it.
Yeah.
So can we answer the question?
Do you want to start, Evan, or?
Can we zone it all there?
Well, I don't want to talk about MBTA's
In the aquifer
because I think
protection
that's a
district, so you
distraction.
can't.
Right,
I think we can zone it where you
I
can.
wanted to,
Hang on. We can't go into MBTA zoning, it's not on the agenda, but the general question about staying away from the aquifer.
that I'd like to,
Can we address that, please? Are you addressing it, or is Andy?
well, I'd like to set the table
Sure,
for
go ahead.
what current regulations are, because I think that's.
As long as it's related to water.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So there's 3 levels of regulation that pertain to this. We'll start with the Board of Health regulations, which is Article 6, their Title V regulations. So the Chelmsford Board of Health presumably has created the most restrictive local Title V regulations the state law permits. They do not allow non-sanitary wastewater to be discharged out of a Title V system within the Zone 1 and Zone 2s. It cannot be, and it requires secondary treatment. So my understanding is that's as far as the local Board of Health can take Title V under the state law. Then you have the zoning bylaw, which has the Aquifer Protection District. That also says you cannot have any discharge non-sanitary wastewater disposal. You also can't have any nasties, no toxic procedures or manufacturing processes that result in toxins being stored on site, being used for manufacturing. And then the final layer is you have, back to the Board of Health, you have their groundwater protection zoning regulations. So back to Andy's point, we've already reached the point, we're beyond the point of whether the town has decided to allow septic systems in Zone 2s. They're allowed. The Chelmsford Board of Health allows them.
Can I address that?
So you're left with, Title V doesn't regulate PFAS. And apparently systems don't have the technology to capture and treat PFAS. But within the current regulatory scheme we're working in and operating in, Chelmsford is as restrictive as you possibly can be. And when you key in on, you can have no non-sanitary wastewater disposal, that means it's clean water. And if it's clean water, then why aren't we as concerned, if not more concerned, about parking lots and stormwater management systems related to parking lots and the highway and the railroad? I mean, those seem to be much more of concern than, as 250 Apollo says, 3 or 4 houses equivalent for a Title V system, where they're proposing a clean facility. And they'll take a condition, and we'll be able to monitor and enforce the condition. So I just think we need to be cognizant of the legal regulatory scheme that we operate within, If the Board of Health has the legal authority to be more restrictive, then they have the ability to do that. And if the Water District has the legal ability to create your own regulations, you're welcome to do that too. My concern, and I've stated this to some of you, is the central point of all this is the planning board regulatory process. And we've already started receiving letters that, in my estimation, go above and beyond what current legal jurisdiction allows. And I certainly don't want the planning board to be engaged in being asked to or considering putting conditions on projects that we know aren't legal. Never mind, not within planning board jurisdiction.
I don't think anybody has asked for anything to be.
Microphone.
Nothing has been asked to be done that's not legal. Anything that's been asked to be done, anything that's been put in a letter has been based on regulation for good reason.
We haven't, there's letters from the district and there's letters from Board of Health.
Exactly.
Some are consistent, some may not be consistent.
Because you don't like what it says.
If you are,
Let's just say the letter quotes the regulation. And I don't necessarily think this is the purview to be discussing
No,
this.
we're talking about 250 Apollo, and that's a real-world scenario here. They've come in tonight and said they can comply with Board of Health regulations. And they work with the Board of Health on the groundwater protection hydrology study.
Mm-hmm. We've talked to them several times about it.
So nowhere within Board of Health regulations does it talk about PFAS. It's all tied back to Title V. The challenge we're trying to discuss tonight is you now have a new regulatory concern introduced by the Water District.
Mm-hmm. Introduced by the state on the Water District.
So apparently the state nor the town has any legal regulatory authority, particularly through Title V,
Can I jump in? So Evan and I have had a lot of discussion on this. And I respect Evan for what he's saying, because on one level, I think he's 100% right. There's a lot of rules out there that say you can do this. But where the district gets concerned is there's the rules that also conflict with the rules. So for example, and I'll just use a basic one, I'm not trying to hammer PFAS, but that's the flavor of it if you want to use it. You can put a septic system in, but if you're discharging PFAS, which is soon to be regulated as a hazardous waste, you're not allowed to discharge that. And that is so ubiquitous in the environment and manufacturing right now, it would not be prudent to put a septic system in a zone 2 or a zone 1 for that matter, unless you can prove that the water is not going by the wells. The water's going somewhere else. So those are the concerns that we have. And PFAS is not the only thing, there's other microconstituents. So it's not that we're saying it's illegal to this, we're just raising the concern that if you do this, this has other ramifications as well.
Right. And my only point is, we have applicants, developers, property owners who are trying to engage based upon the current rules as they are in place. And so this conversation talks about changing the goalpost. As long as the town understands that there will be ramifications to that. And some investor may view that as exceeding authority. And so I think it's important for the town to understand what the current lay of the land is, particularly with Board of Health, because they are the most powerful board in town when it comes to public health. I'm assuming they've gone to the maximum extent that they possibly can. And the Water District's engagement on this is relatively new. And so, if there was a clear legal solution, I'm all for it. But at face value, 250 Apollo, if they comply with Board of Health, then they comply with Board of Health. If the state wants to expedite PFAS regulation, then they should.
So, in that sense, you're right, Evan. What happens with regulations is it takes time for them to catch up.
Sure.
So we know that the state is working on Title V and that is being revised over time. Any developer can put in a Title V, it would be legal. But at the same token, if the district found that Title V was discharging something that was regulated on our end, that we most certainly would take action.
Sure, absolutely.
So that's what we're trying to do, is when we get into the planning process, we're trying to let the developer, hey, we're here, and if this happens, this is a concern of ours.
Agreed. And just final comment, just for full disclosure here, the water district's letters are requesting water quality discharge. So I understand the interest of the district, but again, that's not the Title V standard. So as long as everybody at the table, particularly the planning board, because they're likely going to be the ones that are going to have to sift through this, we can all make requests. We all do it in our letters. But at the end of the day, we need to acknowledge, where our legal line of authority begins and ends. Otherwise you're putting the town, however you want to define that, legal exposure.
Okay. Paul and the water departments, are you okay if I go around and see if there's any other input? Did you want to say something? Okay. Mike? Tony? Evan? You have anything else? Ken? Mike? Any? Pat? Paul? Nancy? You want me to come back to you?
Yeah, come back to me.
Okay, Mike?
I'm sorry.
No problem. Mark?
No.
George? Sue?
No.
Actually, Virginia, can I say one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm not trying to get out of turn.
No, go ahead.
I would say that the district generally thinks there are solutions here, and most of the time we can work with you, but there sometimes is a cost to that, and sometimes that's where I think the developer starts having issues. It's part of life, so.
And I will piggyback on that. With this particular developer, the health department has been working very closely with them to try to make things go smoothly, ask them to comply with the regulation, comply with what we're asking for, and being very specific. So the example I will give you is they called the office and they said, okay, you are asking for us to do this hydrogeological study and the flow of the water, et cetera, specifically, what are you looking for? So with that situation, that is not my area of expertise. So I reached out, it's in the regulation, looked at what they were asking for us to do, reach out to Richard, asked Richard to call this gentleman and specifically tell him what we were looking for in that study. So it's not like we're saying, this is what we need, here you go, and not providing them any assistance.
Okay. Bill? Anything else? Richard? No. I have nothing else. Did I ask you already? I'm going to the Zoom room. Anita? Come back to Anita. Tim, anything else?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Paul?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay, Bill?
I stand by what Andy said.
Okay. Bruce?
I agree with Andy, and I kind of disagree with Evan. I'd rather be challenged.
Write the check.
Evan says write the check.
I don't know how I stand on it.
Christine?
No comments.
Back to Nan.
Thank you. Well, from a planning board standpoint, I would rather not be legally challenged. So here's the thing, is we request comments from all the departments. And
is this going to be about water?
Yes,
Okay.
it is. As a matter of fact.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's expandable, but it's about water. We're not experts in your area of expertise. And for the most part, unless something is totally absurd for the application, we simply take the department's comments and embed them in our findings. So to that respect, I would respectfully ask you in your comments to be clear what is a requirement and what is a recommendation. Because we can implement and negotiate recommendations as we work with the developers, but we wish to embed requirements. Okay? whether it's water, whether it's sewer, whether it's anything else.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else, Paul? Is there any public input at this point? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to move on to long-term sewer capacity objectives. Let you introduce this one as well.
Sure, and again, we're mindful that we've almost been here almost 2 hours, so try to be respectful of time, but when we prepared the agenda, with talking with Virginia,
What did you say?
Yeah, Paul.
yeah, I asked that this be placed on here because, and it sort of went to my earlier comments this evening, is it's hard to establish a plan for long-term sewer if we don't have the vision for it, a community vision of where we want to go. I mean, I have engaged, I said earlier, I'm not going to, try not to be repetitive, but again, with the Congresswoman's office, our state reps, our new incoming state rep, the Middlesex 3 Coalition, the NIMCOG, and the Lowell City Manager and others, and in talking to my colleagues in Dracut and Lowell and in Tingsboro and so forth, and just in general, I mean, a lot of these issues we're talking tonight aren't just unique to Chelmsford. These are problems, particularly in eastern Massachusetts. You know, as we said, everybody wants housing capacity, and we shudder at what the average single-family value, assessed value is in the community of approaching $600,000, and say, how is it affordable and so forth, and where does the next generation go in a competitive market where people are working remotely and everything else.
Where's the last generation?
And so the question becomes in terms of long-term sewer. And there's no readily solution. In speaking with the Lowell City Manager, he assured me that, you know, they're confronting a $60 million consent order from EPA, and you read about it in the media and so forth, because of the combined sewer overflow into the Merrimack River. And Laurie Trahan, as we know, has been at the forefront of that, and now she's even got a greater seniority in Congress as we move forward. That's going to be a big nut for the city to address, but that's not going to provide any additional capacity. So then now to go to the city and say, oh, by the way, you know, can you now expand the plant? The problem with the plant in Lowell is it has no expansion capacity. There's no land there. It's an island. If many refer to it, it's a duck island. There's no land to expand there. And so that's the concern in terms of there's no readily solution to sewer capacity in I'd say the mid, even long term, in terms of what it would entail in terms of feasibility analysis, design, permitting, construction, operation. As I said, we've looked at MWRA connection. Could we, you know, go down towards Burlington? We've reached out to our neighbors in Billerica and so forth. And we've just, and then as I said earlier, if you're trying to build one in Chelmsford, where are you going to site it, folks? We not only the concern about discharge into the groundwater, but who's going to want the trucks and the odor and other pleasantries of having a sewer treatment plant in their neighborhood, particularly when we see the reaction you get from Lowell often from their plant. And so the challenge that we have is you know, how do we go towards long term? But I think even aside from that, going back to the earlier issue, is what is the desire of the community? Because that approach is going to be costly in terms of resources of time and staff, but also in terms of money. Any connection to the MWRA is going to be expensive for two reasons. One is their rates are higher, and two is you have to get your flow to there from here. And the same thing, any connection with Lowell, it isn't just expanding the treatment plant. You also have to have the pipe capacity to get your flow from town through the existing underground infrastructure lines to Lowell, to the plant, through Lowell to the plant. And we almost had a mini crisis having to deal with a line on Littleton Road that was approaching $5 million just to perhaps upgrade a line that would have brought you down Littleton Road, you know, to the center, to Summer Street. So you can imagine the numbers and the costs and so forth that's going to go there. And so I think what would be helpful, because it's not clear to me in the master plan, it's not clear to me from the community in terms of what is the desire. Now, we did a study, and John's here this evening. In 2010, Weston and Sampson in August produced a existing wastewater flow analysis in the Katrina Road Pump Station capacity analysis that was the precursor to the moratorium that was adopted in October of that year. And so they looked at all of the potential developments and so forth that were, in place at that time, and they looked at what the capacity that would be needed and so forth. And at this point in time, many of those have occurred, and some are still remaining, such as 9 Acton Road, Mercury Computer, 1 Barica Road obviously is dead. The River Neck project, we don't know what, that appears to be dead from what we've heard about. And so the question becomes is, bringing, the sewer capacity doesn't go in isolation. It also goes with the accompanying increases in traffic, population, services in the community. And so, as I said earlier, I think the community really needs to engage in a dialogue to develop a direction, because there's two ways to go. As I said earlier, do we want to go with the unregulated flow or the continued development flow, which we know, whether it's the MBTA zoning, as we discussed earlier, and whatever else comes, or is it the what I call the Westford approach is, we don't have sewer, we're good here, and yes, as long as you hit your 40B cap and so forth. And we've discussed this, and again, we're trying to discuss it with state officials, because there is a state effort going on right now to expand housing supply, i.e. the MBTA zoning, and whatever else is behind it. And so that's what I think this community has to confront and hopefully reach a consensus on, is what is the additional capacity? Because the sense that I have is right now we've been able to shelter or prevent any impact on single-family property owners in terms of the ability to add bedrooms, add in-law apartments. And I'm just not sure that, and I just wonder if we could meet the foreseeable demands of the future with infiltration and flow devices and other things, as opposed to continuing to expend resources and efforts towards a basically unregulated capacity of sewer flow.
Paul?
That comes with it.
So, I think the overarching question that you have, we might be able to identify who needs to weigh into that and what do we do, but I don't think we're going to be able to answer that tonight.
No.
But I do think that a good place to start that we do have some control over is to do our own calculations and look at our own data. And by that, I mean, Christine said earlier, we allow 500 gallons per day for residences for expansion of a residence. However, that's going to cap out at 225. Like, every resident in town can't have 500 gallons per day. So if we were to say, here's how many residential buildings we have, and if we were to give all of them the 500 gallon per day, right? And we say, here's the existing commercial and industrial properties, and here's the sewer capacity that they have. And here's what we're going to be required to allocate for MBTA, even if it's never developed. Let's assume it is developed. If we've met our 10% still for affordable housing, great. If not, we got to factor that in too. But there are parameters that we can sit down and calculate today that says, conservatively, worst case, if all of these came into play, every single resident wanted to build an in-law apartment, we know what our commercial and industrial base is in terms of the sewer capacity they're demanding. And we know that we're going to have to allocate, provide for the potential of X number of residents for the MBTA and whatever other factors there are. Why can't we put pen to paper and calculate that out and say, okay, if all of that came into play, conservatively, or at least a known estimate, this is how much capacity we need to have. Now, that doesn't answer your question about, does Chelmsford still want to keep growing, or do we want to just kind of hold where we are? But I think that would at least give us some of what I've been struggling with, which is like, how big is this problem that we have just with what we know? So would that be a reasonable thing to do, to just put pen to paper and say if every residential building needed 500 gallons per day, this is how much capacity we'd need? Because otherwise, how do you manage it when you reach the 225? Right, I mean, that might be a starting point, rather than saying, are we going with full unrestricted sewer? Let's just figure out what we're gonna need by what's here already and by what the law's gonna require us to do.
I'll ask John to weigh in on issues of, capacity.
Well, that's your question. Long-term sewer capacity objectives. Shouldn't our first objective be to at least look at what we are kind of bound to by virtue of who lives here, what buildings are here, and what the state's going to require us to do?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to ask John.
That would be my first order long-term objective.
Well, you have the 2.66, which is reserved just for Chelmsford in your agreement with Lowell, which is the total of 3.01. There's 0.35 million gallons a day for Tingsboro, so.
Yeah, but that's not my question.
I know I'm getting.
Okay.
You can't, it would be a rather extensive thing to go through that inventory that you're talking about, because you'd have to gather all the water use records for every property and look at those. And, I mean, when you're saying that you have the 2.66, and we have what the flows that we're looking at over the last few years for the total have ranged from, for Chelmsford, like 2.4, 2.4, 2.7, 2.6. I mean, you're already in your 2.6 range now. So I think if you went to that exercise, you're gonna see, I think even that you're probably gonna be more over that if you're allowing the 500.
But isn't that the point, to know like what we need? To know where we are, like, we have the ability to put some data together and look at some numbers that's bound, and to me, that would be a logical first step in terms of what is our longer-term need. What do we do to accommodate the residents in the buildings and the requirements we have coming from the state now? And then there's the bigger picture Paul's talking about in terms of, what do we want to, what does the community want to be? But I don't even see that we're addressing from a long-term perspective this analysis or the math.
Because we can't accommodate, It's been said earlier.
No, but
Why?
Paul, that's what she's saying is, we know we can't
Why? I want to do the math, so I know. Right.
You can do that.
I know we can't accommodate.
We're already at 3.06, and I haven't looked at the 225.
You're asking me, what do I?
266 plus 0.35 for Tingsboro, and 0.05 if you look at the worst case for flow of our open vacancy, you're at 3.06. You're already over. So then if you start to look at the additional 225, just do the math.
Right, that's all I'm saying, like, let's do the math and know what the number
Because when you need
is.
to start going to ask the state, say, you want to do these programs, we're already here. So you've got to give us a solution, you've got to give us dollars. You've got something to speak from, rather than just arm waving and all that. Just put the numbers together.
We can do the numbers, yeah.
Yeah.
And then put some kind of percentage reserve on it, and so that's at least our going in place with.
Well, you've got 11% variability in flows too,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I can, on actuals, so, I mean, do the math. Theoretical and the actuals with the variability, put it together. I don't want to go into it.
Yeah, and I'd like to see the water usage versus the sewer usage too.
Yeah, that's.
Because, the question is how much excess water is getting into the sewer system?
And I think that would also help.
when?
And I think that would also help inform, this exercise would help inform, if we want to have a vision that's bigger than what we have already, and I'm not saying we do, but let's suppose we do, it would help inform whether that's even like a realistic thing to do. If our long-term need there's such a gap there that we can't even fill that, then there's no point in setting a larger objective.
Yeah. I mean, we know that, Nan, going back to the flow thing, we have flow meters.
We know that there's,
Sewer flow meters.
Yeah.
We have that.
And we have water flow meters.
And we have water meters, right, so we can.
So we
match the
can
two
be
up.
able to match
Yeah,
them.
exactly.
But how many houses do we have in Chelmsford?
Microphone.
We have 9,000.
Times that by 500.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
You're silly, it's 4.5 million.
Exactly.
So what are we talking about? Seriously, what are we talking about?
Well, that's why Christine said at 225, we're
Yeah.
way over.
Right.
But yet this worst case scenario,
He's asking,
way over.
he's saying, I need guidance on a number to go to our legislators with if they're gonna help us. And I'm saying, and the statement was, like, we gotta figure out what our long-term vision is for the community, and I agree that we need to do that. But pragmatically, we have data, we can just calculate now and use that as a going-in point with the legislators.
Kind of, yeah, look at the
Doesn't mean we're ever
theoretical
gonna use
versus
it,
the
and
actuals.
we might not even get 100% of that, but it's a starting point.
And I know Christina was already looking at, I mean, she's been on maternity, but she is certainly aware of that. And Christina, you're on there, but you can feel free. But I think we talked about it in your office, where looking at the pump stations, looking at the actual flows versus what the water flows were coming in, and look at what the deltas are. So that way, it starts to indicate to you where the II may be most prevalent, in that program, but you start to get all that actual data, and then we know what the theoretical is, so.
Yeah, but it's,
By zone, maybe?
Yeah, but the other problem is, and John can weigh in on this, it's not just the treatment capacity. You also have to look in the sewer main capacity to get there. And I don't know how you calculate that. I mean, that would be, you can do it, you can do it.
Well, do this part first.
Yeah, okay, no, but just saying, it's not just the treatment capacity, it's also, you've got to.
Well, we do have blueprints with the sizing.
Right.
That we can physically look at. and Also,
Yeah.
We have smart
determine where
people.
good
Right, but if you look at those two things,
The
then
numbers
we can
are,
go back and start to put the whole picture together, so you can speak intelligently when the state tries to ram stuff down our throats, or if we start to look at, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to manage, that we have something to go from, some actual
I
data.
think that would be a great starting point to inform
Yeah,
the
me too.
larger discussion.
And honestly, I think Christina's on that same
Okay, no,
wavelength. Christina's.
Christine, your name keeps being dropped. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Yes, so I think in terms of the numbers put together, I think that the numbers that Tony and I had worked on, looking at a 7-year history, and that's 225 properties. That just shows you right now based on our current sewer moratorium. I think also what's important is, I guess, this upcoming pilot program for the private inflow. We don't know what we could potentially remove from the system. We know it's something. We don't know if it's 2%, 5%, 10%. So I think that pilot program will speak to what we potentially remove from the system. I think that is a really important part of the next steps. What we have started to do is look at the in terms of elevation, like the lowest foot in the town and how many parcels is that. And then maybe looking at the first couple hundred parcels in that first, the lowest foot or two elevation. And that will help potentially identify where there's some pumps, and that would be the first start of the pilot program. So I do think that pilot program is really an important piece of the puzzle, because it's what can we, looking at long-term solutions, but as a short term or a medium term, how can we remove inflow from the system? So that pilot program will help identify, what's the build out of that program? Are we looking at 50 some pumps, 100, 500 some pumps? And what's the cost of that?
And so my recommendation would be, when you do this calculation, just assume you don't have any of those.
She's on top.
You're not getting any of that capacity back, right? Because that's gravy. But for the academic of trying to just ballpark a number to start with, I would just not worry that we don't have those answers yet. Assume we don't have it yet.
So I think we do have some numbers. So on the select board presentations on the sewer flow, where the fiscal year 2021, 22, we've had 2.58, 2.54, and 2.59 million gallons per day. And we're at the 2.66. That's 96.6%. So we already know that we're roughly around 97% of our annual flow. So you're just asking us to take what they're asking us to introduce on top of that 3%, and can you fit in there?
No, I'm not even asking can it fit. I'm saying if every house wanted their 500 gallons per day, and if the MBTA, it's not about the capacity we have. If the MBTA wanted to come in, or if under the MBTA new zoning laws, we had to build our 1,700 or however many residents it is, okay, and if every commercial and industrial building that we have was occupied to their capacity, what does that add up to? I don't care if it's over 100%. That's the number we want. So Paul, it's a starting point to say to the legislators, this is some additional capacity you need to help us get. We may never use it all, but we just got to look at some data and be able, it's the only way I can see to justify a number right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a starting point to inform it.
Okay.
We need to have, I think it should be in line with other communities.
To assume you
Yeah.
can't throw a huge number out.
500 is. You know what I mean?
You know.
Hang on, wait, let's do one person at a time here. Go ahead, Paul.
You're willing to throw out a huge number to the legislature, but just make sure it's in line with other communities, is all I'm saying.
Should we at least know what the number is and then decide what we do with it?
Yeah.
Maybe we bring it down, or maybe there's a, all I'm saying is, I don't think we've put pen to paper on that yet, or if we have, I haven't seen it.
I just don't think it's been consolidated
Right,
yet.
the data's out
It's in
there in
different
pieces.
But it just needs to be pulled together.
Yeah.
I think that's all that needs to happen to start with. And then a lot of the work that Tony's doing along with Christine, that's great. That's the stuff we need to do.
Yeah.
And that will continue to revise those numbers, the actuals, as we move along.
But the challenges from the state, and we've seen this with all of their grant programs in the last decade, let's say the last administration, just to be fair, they target resources towards private investment in development. Okay, so if we come in and say, we want this number to meet our existing residential housing supply in our commercial base, they're gonna say, oh, that's fine. Where you get the money and where you get the resources is, well, we have XYZ Corporation that wants to invest and build a plant of this size in this community, and they need this help. Or there's XYZ Corporation that wants to build 400 housing units at XYZ Street, we need your help for that. I.e., how we got the money to facilitate the MassWorks grant for Groton Road, Jackson Road, off of Groton Road, because the state funded that, not because it was just, gee, Chelmsford has a need, it's because they saw it to support the construction of additional housing units. And so why I raise this and take the time to do that is, that's the state incentive. Think about it, if their market is, and their mantra is, they want to increase housing supply, that's where they're going to direct their resources to. They're not going to be concerned with a community's existing needs. And I agree, we're gonna calculate, and we will work with this, we'll work with Christine and everyone else, what I'm trying to do is, trying to look at the next step is, if you then go and try to get that assistance, they're not going to assist just with the existing need, and the only time we ever saw that was on the Cape, and that was because people couldn't stay in their units because of the failed septic systems. So I'm just trying to point out the need, and the bigger issue is the vision and the direction the town wants to go is, we really need to help determine that, because if we're going to make an ask, we need to know what we're willing to take on, because they're not, the chances of them providing resources to Chelmsford and any other community for existing supply is going to be very limited. What they did do, and we saw this.
But Paul, wouldn't a part of that analysis or that calculation is going to be things that don't exist? Suppose we built out to the whole MBTA requirement.
The 1,700.
Suppose,
1,700 houses.
Right, and then the other part of it is, if the smart people at Weston and Sampson or on your staff have the ability to say, okay, well, here's our commercial industrial buildings, and here's the ones that have potential for redevelopment or reuse, right, that's part of the economic development argument, possibly.
But I think the question underneath that, what I was getting at is, does the town want to meet the MBTA zoning?
It's a distraction.
No, it's not a distraction, it's the reality of it.
It's a distraction.
We have 8 communities that have stepped forward and said they're not even submitting the survey because they don't want to build those units. And what I'm saying is.
But we're trying to get some rationale for the state.
What I'm saying is, do we know?
It's just rationale.
Does this town want to do that?
It's just rationale, that's all we're saying, we don't know. It's just rationale.
I'm just trying to get you to be thinking while we're doing this other work.
Yeah, but as I recall, the MBTA zoning can also be zoned around existing units. So it will not just be new, we might be able to pick up some.
The only obligation is to zone.
Right, exactly.
And as we've discussed tonight,
So let's not get off topic.
if the town, with the water district, Board of Health, Planning Board, come to some sort of agreement that Zone 2s are off limits.
Exactly.
Well, then the reality as to how many of those 1,700 units could be built under MBTA zoning gets smaller and smaller. Nothing that the town is doing or not doing, it's just the rules.
No, I'm with you. So if you put in the entire zone, and then you said, except now we're constrained, it gets even smaller because of the.
Right, but I think
The aquifers and.
to extend this discussion.
Right.
And to extend Paul's point, depending on how individual towns strategize, whether it's give the state a number to say, hey, if you help us, we'll play ball.
Mm-hmm.
Other towns may pursue the previous discussion we had about Zone 2s.
Mm-hmm.
The state's going to react accordingly, just as Paul said. So the state historically, over the last decade, has basically leveraged their money with towns that are willing to accommodate private development. They haven't taken the step that we're talking about, which is come into a community and solve their existing problem. So that's something I think Paul's referring to is just playing this forward. It's good to get the numbers to know what our build-out capacity would be. But it's not clear to what extent that's going to really resonate with the state.
Well, we don't know until we put it together.
We don't know, right.
We have to put it together because maybe the other 8 towns did the work, but maybe they didn't. And they just, their sense is, no, we can't do that. Well, if we go in as the 9th, let's go in with the idea that we've done our work. We know the numbers, here's the zones, here's the other challenges we have between max capacity and aquifers, and put it all together. So we have a smarter approach to it.
It makes sense for the here and now.
All we're talking about.
I think the engagement with the state, with MBTA zoning and whatever else they have for phase 2, phase 3, particularly PFAS and aquifer protection, the state's going to, just like Paul's suggesting the town needs to make a decision, the state's likely going to have to make strategic decisions too.
Exactly.
And they may step in and, override certain local home rule authority that currently exists. They're going to have to make difficult decisions too.
And it goes back to administration too, though. I mean, we don't know how she's gonna react a lot differently.
The whole 40B law is an example.
Well, I was just going there. So if we fall under 10%, we're right back there again, too.
Correct. And as we've discussed earlier, if they're over 10,000 gallons per day, they can build their treatment plant in a zone 2. So, we need to be strategic, but we also need to acknowledge.
I want to go around and see if there's any other comments. Hang on a second, Paul. But it also just seems to me like, first of all, this is a one-topic meeting discussion. I mean, it's, I don't have the steam for another 2 hours. I don't know what you guys. But it may also involve conservation and school committee. And, I think it's bigger than this room even. So we probably need to kind of plan who and how we have that discussion and put a framework in place for it. Because I don't think with a free form is going to get us there tonight.
At some point, we have to do
Microphone.
a study of what is
A microphone.
plan. Oh, sorry. I apologize. I said, at some point, we need to put together a serious study of what is our expansion capabilities and desires. And that involves more than just sewer.
Wouldn't that be a master plan?
Well, no, it's really not.
Isn't that what it's called, a master plan for development?
Maybe it's a master plan for development, but it's not the master plan, the 10-year master. It's a specialized plan outside of that.
Paul, are you okay if I go around and see if there's other thoughts? Why don't we start in the Zoom room this time? Bruce Harper, do you have anything else?
I'm all set, Virginia, thank you.
Bill?
Thank you, Virginia. I stand with Bruce.
Paul?
I'll follow those two.
Okay. Team Shanahan?
I'm all set as well, thank you.
Okay, Paul, you're here. Anita?
I'm all set.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Christine. John, you have anything? Mike? Nope. Harry? Evan?
Just, surprisingly, I will agree with Richard Day. I think the short term. And I think that goes back to the policy we discussed earlier. The next 10 years is steady state. And whatever the policy can accommodate to keep your current flows at that capacity, that's the strategic goal.
Thank you. Ken? Andy?
Good.
Pat? Paul?
I stand with Bruce.
Nancy?
Had enough.
Mike?
I'm all done.
Mark?
I'm talked out.
George?
I'm just concerned with.
Microphone, please.
This guy's skills are going, man. The mic, George. Thank you, sir. I'm just concerned about the new administration. You know, I think they may just take an altogether different,
That's a good point.
outlook, especially on the MBTA stuff, as Baker was gonna do, so, I think that's, we're gonna wait and see.
Sue?
All set?
Richard? And I'm all set. Christine, do you have anything else?
Put the hammer down.
No additional comments.
Paul, do you have anything?
Yeah, we'll work and get this calculated.
And Paul, I'll work with you to plan this larger discussion, okay?
Thank you.
We'll figure it out. Is there any public input? Okay, seeing none, it is 8:19, and I will take.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Anybody opposed?